Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. Here are the four big stories for today. This is Ukraine War News. I do this every day. Please subscribe if you have not already. So Viktor Orban visited both Kyiv and he visited Moscow. When he visited Kyiv, he was talking about how, how about you have a ceasefire and then you can have peace negotiations, and that's rejected. When he visited Moscow, Putin wasn't all that interested in making peace. In fact, Putin sees the final end of the war in destroying Ukrainian statehood. This is according to the Institute for the Study of War. On July 5, during a meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Russian leader Vladimir Putin firmly rejected the notion of a negotiated ceasefire, instead advocating for a definitive conclusion to the war that would obliterate Ukrainian sovereignty. Putin emphasized that a temporary truce, so Putin wasn't interested in the ceasefire either, would only allow Ukraine to regroup and rearm, insisting on a comprehensive and irreversible end to the conflict. Putin's rhetoric demands highlights his refusal to settle for anything less than totally dismantling of Ukrainian statehood and national identity. His conditions include ceding substantial Ukrainian territories and the complete surrender of Ukrainian military as prerequisites for any peace talks. That is, turn over all of these four new Ukrainian oblasts that he now calls Russia, all the way to their borders. Not like even areas that they never actually controlled. Turn that over to Russia, lay down your arms, and then we can have some peace talks. That's going to work out really well. Furthermore, Putin likely envisions Ukraine's capitulation as a means to overthrow its democratically elected government, replacing it with a pro-Russian administration that aligns with his strategic interests. A couple of key takeaways from the ISW. Putin is demanding both the surrender of a significant portion of Ukraine's territory and people to Russian occupation and Ukrainian military capitulation in advance of any negotiation. Like, that's not even like what has to happen after. That's what has to happen so they can have peace talks. Putin, now this is what's really important. Putin's rejection of any ceasefire agreements contradicts the Kremlin's previous efforts to place the onus on negotiation on the West and Ukraine. Like, we want to have peace talks, but it's big bad Kyiv that doesn't want to do it. That's out the window now. Putin attempted to portray Orban as an EU representative who can speak on the EU's behalf, a claim that the EU officials explicitly denied. I talked about that yesterday. Okay. Big story number two. So this was really interesting because about a week ago, I talked about a Meduza Mediazona story where they had actually counted 64,000, I think it was, and change, that they have actually seen the obituaries or been able to identify as dead Russian soldiers. I said, okay, so you round that up, let's say to 100,000 and do the math, and we get pretty close to it. So now they claim 120 Russian soldiers have died in Ukraine, and that jives with what I was talking about just the other day. Now, why do they say 64,000? Because this is what they could actually count, and here they're amplifying and trying to extrapolate from what they know, and they haven't been able to count explicitly yet. Some of these people are left on the battlefield and there's no obituary. Some are no longer with us in other ways, and some are just never going to be calculated or counted. A major military and political failure that will have a lasting impact on history. A fresh assessment by Meduza and Mediazona indicates that roughly 120,000 Russian soldiers have died in Ukraine. According to a report by independent Russian media outlets, Meduza and Mediazona on July 5th, approximately 120,000 Russian troops have been killed since the commencement of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The majority of Western estimates fall within the range of 400,000 to 500,000 total casualties. So, and how would we get there? So if we take that 120,000 and then, you have 3 times as many casualties, roughly, it could be 2 times, it could be 5 times, but that's going to bring you right up to 480,000, and we're at 500,000 and change according to Ukraine, and it seems like it fits about right. Encompasses the deceased, the wounded, and the missing. That 500,000 kind of figure aligns closely with Mediazona's recent estimate. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been a resounding failure that will be scrutinized by military academies worldwide for decades to come. Like, if you thought that you were going to do something in 3 weeks because you're an authoritarian and everybody below you is saying, yes, boss, you're so awesome, boss, here's what's going to happen. You're going to roll in and they're going to offer you flowers and say, please take over. Yeah, that's the problem. So finally, despite approximately 120,000 fatalities and around 500,000 total casualties, Russia has failed to capture a single one of the 23 regional capital and special status cities that were under Ukraine's control at the outset of the full-scale invasion. So when trolls are saying, "So, Ukraine, are you winning yet?" The answer is yes. Because what was winning for Russia was 3 weeks and we're in, and that never happened. Let's look at the next big story. Ben Hodges posted this. It's about an article that Breedlove and some others were involved in. Seek the initiative, maintain the initiative. We have blown both of these, says Breedlove. Now, who's Breedlove? This is Air and Space Forces magazine. Former USAF European commanders let Ukraine take the fight to Russia. Retired General Philip Breedlove, former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, is who we're first talking about, and then I'll introduce the other generals along the way. We are nearly completely deterred right now, Breedlove said, of the U.S. reluctance to take actions or provide Ukraine with weapons that could strike inside Russia. That's right. Putin has completely deterred Biden and others, but Biden is the leading figure who has been deterred by Putin's saber-rattling. Basic military doctrine advises, seek the initiative, maintain the initiative, and we have blown both of these. We are deterred and we are reactive, Breedlove said. We need to step up and have the courage to address this. Now, there was an event about a new paper from the Mitchell Institute, co-authored by General David Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute, and retired General Walters was in this, and General Harrigan. Now, Walters pointed out that it takes unanimous agreement on the part of NATO allies, now numbering 32 members, to take offensive action. And that makes it very tricky for NATO to be all on the same page. They go on and say NATO should be in a position to where irreversibly Ukraine becomes a member of NATO in 6 months to 2 years or 3 years from now. And those are the kinds of campaign momentum items that we have to be prepared to do. Now, if you don't do that, you leave Ukraine just dangling out there. And that's what we've done. And that's what we will do next week, unfortunately, to Ukraine at the NATO conference. We need to continue to put pressure on it to get those policy shifts where we can begin to strike targets at range that are critical infrastructure that Russia possesses, that they are using against Ukraine to strike Ukrainian sovereign soil. And those are certainly justifiable targets in anyone's observation. You better have a steady, positive military campaign momentum so that you can be the strategic victor. If Ukraine is to have a shot at victory, then we need to empower them to break out of this stalemate, because really where you are right now is somewhat stalemated. It's going to be a war of attrition, very slow grinding. And that requires effective air power. Well, you're going to have F-16s coming soon, but you also need air defense as well, and you need to be able to use combined arms in a meaningful way. Plus, rules of engagement that allow them to use it decisively. Air superiority can provide Ukrainian forces the freedom from attack and the freedom to attack that's absolutely necessary for them to achieve advantages relative to the larger and stronger Russian forces. Only with the kind of integration that creates synergy between surface and air operations can Ukraine further its military momentum on the battlefield. Breedlove argued that we are not giving Ukraine everything they need. We certainly are not. And we're too scared of Putin's red lines that turn out not to be actual red lines. What we need is the ability to broadly use those tools that we bring to the fight that are integrated ability to hold Russian targets at risk before the Russian forces can be brought to bear on Ukraine. Like, if they're not afraid of being hit, then that's a problem. They need to be worried about it. As it stands now, we have to wait for them to come across the border, except for a couple of areas that we've authorized. We have to wait for Russia to fire or strike before we respond, and we need to break out of that and use all the tools in the Air Force's toolbox. I think that's spot on, and that's where we need to be if we're going to see anything change. But in the meantime, we have to brace against political problems. So, for example, the UK just had their elections. They're secure. The new government is going to be right there with Ukraine. We worry about what's going to happen in the United States, but we should also be concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. As I'm speaking, it is Saturday, July 6th. Tomorrow, on the 7th, is the French election. Le Pen pledges to block French troops' deployment to Ukraine. France's national rally, led by Le Pen, has declared its intention to prevent troop deployments to Ukraine and restrict the use of French-supplied weaponry by Kyiv against Russian territory if the party wins the parliamentary elections and secures the prime minister's office. You can read all about it in the Kyiv Independent. That's exactly what they said. No long-range missiles, no troops on the ground. After months of discussion, Macron said that he was finalizing a coalition of countries to send military instructors to Ukraine, but France might not be one of them if the elections go the wrong way. Le Pen says we have two red lines sending French troops to Ukrainian territory and the delivery of long-range weapons that could hit Russia and therefore make France a co-belligerent in the conflict. But that's exactly what Ukraine needs from the West, militarily speaking. So Ukraine's partners are divided on what to do and the extent to which they should be helping Kyiv or allowing Kyiv to use Western-supplied weapons against military targets in Russia. So where's that going to lead us? Well, Jens Stoltenberg says we cannot have Minsk III. Well, you remember Minsk I and Minsk II, right? The Russians went into eastern Donbass, agreed to the ceasefire, Minsk I, violated that, moved the front line even further west, agreed to Minsk II, waited for 7 years, and then launched a full-scale attack that took even more. We cannot have Minsk III. Now, every time that the Russians talk about it, they talk about how the Ukrainians violated that, but that puts it in perspective. So if you provide them with what they need, then you get to a situation where instead of having Minsk III and some kind of terrible, non-durable peace, you actually have this, where Russia actually gets a taste of its own medicine and gets pushed back, and then you might have a chance at a Russia that's not so hostile, like you have with Japan and Germany after World War II. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.